Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode or another session of Londoniyyah. Today we're going to go on to Revelation and the Prophets, which are two things we need to establish as Muslims. Now, just to remember or to remind ourselves of what we covered in the previous session, we spoke about God's existence. We went through some arguments, namely the contingency argument. Today we're going to be trying to establish the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the truth of the Quran, which is a very staple part, obviously, of the objective, because we're not just trying to get people to believe in one God, but the fact that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was actually a true prophet, and also that the Quran is the final revelation revealed to mankind. But for that we need evidence, and obviously today we're going to be going through some of those evidences. So the first thing we're going to be going through is some categories. Now, one distinction that should be kind of thought of is the sufficient/necessary conditions distinction, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. If I say something is required as a necessary condition, I mean that if it's not there, then the condition can never be met, or that the thing can never be met in and of itself. For example, if I say that if I wanted to get married, and it's necessary for another human being, namely a female, to be there. That's a necessary condition, otherwise I can't be married. However, for it to be a sufficient condition, in order for my marriage to count, Islamically speaking, for example, there has to be, for example, two witnesses, and the mahar has to be there, and the wali has to be there. So the existence of the woman is a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition, because otherwise it would be a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. Obviously, which is not allowed in Islam. I'm giving an Islamic example, obviously you guys can understand it. But for it to be a sufficient condition, I have to fulfill the other criterion, or the pillars of nikah, which are three pillars, namely the mahar, the two witnesses, and the wali. If these three things are met, then marriage is done. Okay, and obviously her consent, and your consent, and that's I'm taking that into consideration. Now these are conditions. These are sufficient and necessary conditions. Now we're going to go through some necessary conditions, but many of you already know them. So we're going to go through them quickly for Revelation. What are the necessary conditions? And we're going to go through the sufficient conditions. When we talk about sufficient conditions now, we are going to be referring to a different kind of framework. Like when we were arguing for God's existence, we were arguing deductively, sometimes from first principles. With this, is a little bit different, because now we are going to argue probabilistically. Probabilistically, meaning we are going to infer to the best explanation, and this is referred to as abductive reasoning. It's inference to the best explanation. When you make an inference to the best explanation, this is called abductive reasoning. And this is a kind of probabilistic rationalization. And most of the things we do includes this level of what you call epistemic probabilistic reasoning. So things that you've done today, everything that you've done today, almost everything, kind of implies that. Like when you woke up and then you stood up, you went to the toilet or whatever you did, had a shower, pressed the button for the shower, this is going to work, you went into the car, you started driving the car, this is going to work. Why? Because it's worked yesterday, it's worked the day before. If it wasn't a car, then, on the tree, sat there waiting for the train or waiting for whatever, this is going to happen, it's going to come. There's a train there. You believe that, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting there. Imagine if people didn't believe that trains were coming, where they sit on the bus stop. What kind of fools would they be? So we employ a probabilistic reasoning in life without having to do any kind of total probability actual calculations. We don't sit there and say, well, actually, what's on a Bayes theory or total probability mathematical theory, what's the chances that this will happen or that? Sometimes we do that. Maybe when people gamble, they do that. But otherwise, they don't really do that. People live their life using epistemic probability, and using that, they come to conclusions, almost intuitive, without reference to anything else in their day-to-day life. You go on your phone, you call somebody, or you expect someone to answer or not. You expect there to be a connection or not. You expect when you go on a plane for you not to crash, even though there are some chances that you will crash. When you were in this building right now, we're expecting the building to stay upright. Although obviously the lights have switched off, and maybe we expected the lights to stay on. and so on. So what we're saying is that we use this kind of reasoning. Now, in terms of necessary conditions, it's really interesting. Wallahi, it's very, very interesting that the Quran is the only ancient religious text that I know of that even has a verse relating to falsification and with respect to contradictions. وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If it was from other than God, they would have found in it many contradictions. So the first thing is, a necessary condition for something to be from God, which is the all-knowing, as we've described before, when we said that God is the all-knowing, He's the one, He's the powerful, etc. If something is, the source of it is the all-knowing God, it cannot have contradictions. Now, the idea that something that is from an all-knowing God should not have contradictions, the challenge doesn't come anywhere except for the Quran. It's not in the Old Testament, it's not in the New Testament, and it's not in the Bhagavad Gita, it's not in the GGS, it's nowhere to be found, only in the Quran. It's as if the Quran at least acknowledges that if a revelation is to be from God, it has to be internally and externally consistent. Because this would be undermining the knowledge, the supposed knowledge, the perfect knowledge of God, if there is not internal consistency to a perfect degree. So the Quran challenges people to find contradictions within the book. Moreover, in addition to that, the Quran must be preserved. It has to be preserved. The access of the original people to the Quran has to be the same access that we have. Otherwise, they would have a preferential access to guidance than we do. And if the Quran is meant to be for all peoples and all times, or if the guidance, the final revelation, is meant to be for all peoples and all times, then it has to be accessible to all peoples and all times in its purest and completest of forms. Someone will say, what about people that have not been introduced to the Quran? We know theologically they're not judged in the same way. People that have been Islamically introduced to the Quran and Sunnah and then they reject it, have a different ruling altogether, an eschatological ruling, to those who have not been, like in the Aborigine jungle, or I don't know where, or this place or that place or forest, or even those individuals who live within Western societies who have wrong understandings of Islam, or the only exposure they have to Islam is a false understanding to Islam. وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. We were not going to punish a people until we sent them a messenger or prophets or messengers. So this is to say that if people are not given such messengers and the message has not received to the person, then they should not be judged in the same way as someone who has. So the access point has to be the same. So preservation and internal/external consistency must be prerequisites and necessary conditions for a revelation to be from God. Now, bear in mind, these conditions, which are necessary conditions, are not to be found in the Old Testament or the New Testament, by the admission of the scholars. Almost the consensus, by the way. The consensus of Christian scholars, this is a big thing to mention, almost the consensus agree now in biblical scholarship, what we call text criticism, that the Bible is completely interpolated and fabricated, and there's layers of fabrication and interpolation. From Athanasius in the 4th century, who is the one who put all the books together, all the way through to the newest translations of the Bible, the New International Version, the Revised Standard Version, King James Version, this, that, whatever. All of these have different variants, contradictory variants, what to include, what to exclude. We don't have the same, we have so many controversies in Islam. It remains the case that with all of the sects in Islam that oppose each other, no sects, the sects in Islam are not fighting over what the Quran is. You don't find Deobandis and Brelvis and Salafis and Sufis attacking each other. This is the Quran, this is not the Quran. They fight about everything else, but they agree on what the Quran is, correct? Have you ever seen a controversy? No. Whoever comes out with something is usually outcast and thrown out. If someone comes out with this is not the Quran, they're outcast and thrown away. Simple as that. Even with all the controversies in Islam, this is not one of them. It's not one of them. We have qira'at, yes, we have different variations, whatever. These are all qira'at which are agreed upon. Yeah, they are agreed upon. And so, having said that now, so we said, on on the 2 points, which are necessary conditions for revelation to be from God, these 2 points which are necessary conditions are not even found in the other religions. Origen of Alexandria, who wrote a book called On First Principles, and in the back of his book, I remember reading this for the first time, the Butterworth translation, he was referring to the very first page of the Old Testament. And it says, on the first day, obviously God created the night and the day. On the fourth day, he created the luminaries. And he was saying, what man of intelligence would believe that the night and day was created the first day and the luminaries were created on the fourth? Yani, how could there be night and day without the luminaries? It's what he said. He said, this is why we have to accept this is why we have to look at the Old Testament or the Bible in a spiritual sense. And by that he means metaphorize it. In the book of Genesis chapter 1 verse 11, on the third day, you had vegetation, which is the herbage and so on, being created by God, apparently, right? But in Genesis chapter 2 verse 5, which is the next chapter, you see that it's quote, no plant had sprung up yet. That's what it said. So were there plants or were there not plants? Recently, William Lane Craig, he put in his Reasonable Faith, he was saying, this is his quote, something to the effect of, it seemed like the author of the Bible didn't care if there were contradictions or not. When I told him that he said that, he tried refuting me and said, well, or he wrote it down, he tried to refute me recently, yeah? He said, well, if I really wanted to, I can see where the follies of the Quran and the contradictions therein. I'm waiting to find, I'm waiting to see this. This is what he said. It's like saying, well, I'll get my dad on you, Okay, just bring the beef, whatever. Just give me the evidence. Instead of telling me I could do it if I wanted to. Even though his whole career was based on Al-Ghazali. Basically, his whole career, if Ghazali was not there, it would be a necessary condition for him to be who he is today. That is not even sufficient. So, and obviously Ghazali, he wrote a book called Al-Qistas al-Mustaqim. I'm not sure if you know this book, but he basically said that all his arguments, not all his arguments, but he's bringing ayat from the Quran and saying, these are the logical arguments in the Quran. It's called Al-Qistas al-Mustaqim. He says, look, this is a logical argument, His whole point, the point of the book was to show the logical arguments in the Quran. So, which acted as a basis for Al-Ghazali's, everything that begins with this has a cause, the universe begins with this, therefore the universe has a cause, may have come directly from the Quran. William Lane Craig used the Quran to protect the Bible, and now he's attacking the Quran. Can you imagine this guy? Anyway, that's another guy for another day. And he spelled my name wrong in the refutation as well. He spelled my name wrong. Hajib. It's not Hajib, it's hijab. And he knows it. He knows my name. But he spelled it wrong just to show that he doesn't know who I am. Anyway, so there are necessary and sufficient conditions. And there are contradictions in the Old Testament. And the whole Bible is not preserved. You can't say any of that stuff about the Quran. There's no argument that can be made. I mean, there are arguments that are made by Orientalists, non-Muslim Orientalists, that talk about general preservation of the Quran. There's no such argument, like-for-like argument that is made about the Bible. There is no such like-for-like argument that is made about the Bible. So you can say, well, it's debatable if the Quran is preserved. The fact that it's debatable that the Quran has no contradictions in it. Fine, it's debatable. Debatable means it could be the case and it couldn't be the case. With the Bible, we know for a fact it's not the case. So it's not even debatable, it's consensus. So it's eliminated. You've eliminated the Bible. We've eliminated it with the Trinity, and you've eliminated it with this as well. Okay? Now, having said that, we are going to go into some of the evidences now. That we've talked about the necessary conditions. Now we are going into the sufficient conditions. Let's think about this together. So I've divided, it into 3 types. You have Quranic evidence that comes directly from the Quran. And you have extra Quranic evidence. Now some people, they seem not to understand how things work. So they say, well, if you say that some evidence has come outside the Quran, that means you're committing kufr. This is what they say. Some Salafists, from the right wing of Salafism, not all of them of course, but some strands of Madkhalism and so on, they say, If you're saying there's any evidence coming outside the Quran, you're committing kufr because you're saying there's evidence that's better than the Quran. But this is a weak type of argumentation, not least because there are some things which have been corroborated from outside sources which the Quran talks about. غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ هُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. The Romans have been defeated. How do you know the Romans have been defeated? And that they will defeat after. You have to go and see outside the Quran if the guy's going to be defeated or not, which is now an evidence, which is a historical evidence outside the Quran. تلك من أنباء الغيب نوحيها إليك ما كنت تعلمها أنت ولا قومك من قبل هذا فاصبر إن العاقبة للمتقين. This is Allah, he mentions many things about different prophets, Nuh and different prophets, and he says, these are from the news, this is from the news of the unseen, which you didn't know, or which we reveal upon to you. Yeah? ما كنت تعلمها أنت ولا قومك من قبل هذا. You and your people did not know these things before that. فاصبر إن العاقبة للمتقين. So you have another layer of historical arguments, which once again can be corroborated by outside. Another thing is physical miracles of the Prophet. The physical miracles of the Prophet, where the Prophet did things, and so on. These are things that the Prophet did, which are not Quranic. They're not within the Quran. Obviously, it's within the Prophet's own remit. He was doing this kind of thing. But this is what we mean by extra Quranic. It's not Quran. It's more in line of Sunnah, this one. Yeah? And then you have the Sunnah type evidences, like we said, the prophecies, the historical ones. Today we're going to go through, and also the Prophet himself is, because if you Surah Al-Bayyinah, لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين منفكين حتى تأتيهم البينة رسول من الله يتلو صحف مطهرة. That is Rasul himself is an evidence, because the Prophet himself is an evidence. So his life is an evidence. He's a bayyinah. In fact, he's a very clear evidence. Because when you assess the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ from the beginning to the end, from when he was a young man, young boy, all the way up to when he was a man and a prophet and when he got married and so on, you realize that actually he himself is an evidence. Now I want you to think about how that is the case. So with the person next to you, I'm going to give you a good time here. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to think about the following question. I'm going to give you very clear parameters, okay? I want you to try and think of the following. If you had 3 minutes to sum up the Prophet ﷺ's life and mission, just life and mission, not going into miracles or that kind of thing just yet. Just life and mission. If you had 3 minutes, someone said, who was the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? Someone, non-Muslim that you know, asked you, who was the Prophet? You have 3 minutes. What would be the events that you would mention? Okay? What would be the key salient points that you mention? So I want to give you 5 minutes with the person next to you to think about like 5 to 7 points, bullet point type thing. And then I'm going to give each of you 2 to 3 minutes to answer that question, because I think it needs to be fluid on our tongues how we answer this question. Does that sound all right? All right, 5 minutes, go ahead. I'm going to give you guys time to speak, all right? So everybody's going to get 3 minutes. Everyone's going to get 3 minutes, all right? Because we need to get used to speaking as well. So we'll start on the right and then move around, okay? Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ, I think the first kind of main important event that we should establish is who he was before prophethood. So the fact that he was trustworthy, people in society, they praised him, they accepted him to society, they all trusted him, and also the fact that he was unlettered, and he didn't have an education to be able to read and write. So I think that's the kind of the first main event, who he was before prophethood. And then so at the age of 40 he was receiving revelation, and his revelation was from God, and the only thing that he was calling people to was to worship Allah alone. And it was only for this reason, it seems like something which is very simple, but because of this one message, just to worship Allah alone, the people, they outcast him from society. So just for this message, he didn't want material things, he didn't want power or anything, because the people, they offered this to him. They offered him material possessions, they offered him power, but then he rejected them all. Why? Because he wanted people to just worship Allah alone. So he wasn't compromising on his message. And then the kind of last event I would mention is kind of after the Hijrah, which is in Medina, and kind of the combination of his life, where by the end of his life, people were able to see that he was successful in all areas, in that he was successful as a father, as a husband, as a family man, but then also as a lawmaker, he brought laws and principles into the justice system, into politics, into economics, and he and even in war, and he was successful in all of these areas. And then also in prophethood, he was also
Just one thing, I'll be careful of using the word lawmaker before I forget, because obviously we believe the laws come from. Yeah, keep going. Sir.
Yeah, but yeah, so I think these kind of three areas are good proofs, and if one wants to examine these three areas,
Can you
then
repeat the 3 areas again?
so the first one being who he was before prophethood, and how he was trusted for society, and then second is when he was receiving revelation, and then he was outcasted from society, exactly what his message is, him receiving the Quran, even though he was unlettered, he was reciting these miraculous words, these words that the Arab poets they couldn't compete with, and then the third being kind of the culmination of his life and the success that he had in all of these areas at the end. Yeah.
That's good. That's 3 minutes. The person next to you, please.
You can start.
Yeah, go ahead.
The brother pretty much covered all the points that we were thinking about, but yeah, so I'll probably be just reiterating what he said. So one, I think the fact that his character was well and truly established way before he proclaimed prophethood is a very important to point out. And then the fact that he was unpleased with the state of affairs in terms of spiritual state of affairs of the society that he was living in. He was extremely uncomfortable with the polytheism that was present there in Mecca at the time. And then, just like the brother mentioned, the fact that he basically had everything at that point because he was born into a very noble family. He had to give up everything, and in return basically got nothing. He just asked people to worship one God. It's not like he was calling for people to help him out or something. So he basically gave up everything and was persecuted. And in return he only asked people to call for God, to worship God. So that's I think another good indication of him being legitimate. And then also just being true to his message and mission throughout all the persecution, all the suffering that he went through is another thing that should be pointed out. And then also the fact that until the end of his life. He was he's straight true to his mission, and it's very clear that he wasn't until the very moment that he died, he wasn't expecting any worldly things in return for what he was asking for from the people. So even if somebody comes to say things like, well, he had 9 wives and tried to imply that he was living a hedonistic lifestyle, all we have to do is just go back to his life to see that he was a true ascetic in every sense of the word, and the argument that he was a hedonist or something, it just doesn't hold any grounds. So I would say his consistency with his consistency and him staying true to his mission, I think it's a key sign of his prophethood.
Okay, you have 30 seconds. You want to end there?
I think I'll end there.
Okay, nice. Next person.
Yeah, so this is if someone asks us to summarize the life of Prophet ﷺ. So as I'll start by talking about the fact that basically, some simple information in terms of where he came out from. So Prophet ﷺ was, we believe, sent as a guide, as somebody who was to call the people to the religion of Islam. He was sent to an area in Mecca, a society that was relatively cut off from other areas and was suffering from an immense number of vices. There was sort of sexual lewdness within the community. There was intense problems of tribalism, racism. There was immense sort of warfare over petty matters that were going on within the community. And so his entire lifestyle, his entire life from the beginning of his life until the end is something that the Muslims take guidance from and inspiration from. And it's part of an evidence of his prophethood in that he was protected from indulging in all of these lewd things even before prophethood. Eventually, at the age of 40, he received the Quran, which is transformative. It's particularly potent because he was unlettered himself, and yet he came forth with something that was linguistically sort of unprecedented in the Arabic language. He begins a spiritual teaching, inculcating values and morals within the people that begin to follow him. And for 13 years in Mecca, he's offered all of these things of the dunya, of the world, money, wealth, power, and he rejects all of it, and he, stays firm, him and his companions, whilst they're being oppressed, abused, tortured, and he's just teaching them these things, and he has nothing to offer them except La ilaha illallah and Tawheed, and a reformation of their souls and their character, and they love him and they follow him in that, and he takes nothing from the world either. Eventually, he leaves Mecca and he goes and they make hijrah to another city called Medina, to take a refuge there from the hardships that they were suffering. And at this point in time, as he's now the ruler of a political community, as when people begin to march in the community, he has a responsibility to defend that community. And so there's a series of battles that then take place, and we see a different sort of aspect of his character, where he is somebody who leads his community not only spiritually but also militarily, politically. And you see like pragmatism, you see his negotiations, you see the way he engaged with all the different tribes of Arabia at that particular time. And so yeah, he fulfills his prophetic mission, and when he leaves Mecca, he leaves sort of with the promise or the aspiration that he will eventually return, and he eventually returns and retakes the city, and establishes it as a place of monotheism, as opposed to polytheism. And most potently, before he passes away, he gives his companions the responsibility of taking this message of Islam to the rest of the world. And so even after he dies, there's an evidence really of the tremendous achievement of his life, that he not only was an immense leader in himself, but he created leaders and he created people that came afterwards that took the message of Islam and gave birth to an amazing civilization of people.
Beautiful. Okay, before we continue to the rest, I want us to create a model answer. So can we have everyone taking notes, bullet point notes on what's already been said, so that we can have some, if there's something that's missed out, and then, so what were some of the points that were made already? I can't see you, just shout out, don't worry.
He was a great military leader, teacher, husband, father, general, family man in general.
Okay, let's try and get this in chronology though. Yes, you're right, definitely. But let's start with Mecca first before we go to Medina. So what were some of the main things that were said about in Mecca?
Prophethood. So even prior to prophethood, him being unlettered and everything, he was deemed trustworthy by everybody.
Yeah, all right, brilliant. So trustworthy and unlettered. So do you want to put that down, so that he was unlettered? Why is that significant? Because
what was to come later will indicate, some sort of truth to the claim that he is, a prophet of God.
Why is that the case?
Because he would have been outside the influence of
right.
literature, and
right.
So they couldn't say that he read such and such, and
exactly.
that influenced him.
Good point. Right. So let's put that point down. Let's put down a Sadiq al-Amin, the truthful and the trustworthy one. Yeah. Now let's be a little bit critical here. What if someone were to ask, well, what is the evidence that he was a Sadiq al-Amin? That he was actually the truthful one and the trustworthy one? What would someone, how do you prove, so you're making that claim, but how can we prove that he was a Sadiq al-Amin, the truthful one, the trustworthy one?
Sorry, you can say that before his prophethood, the warring tribes of Arabia used him as an arbitrator.
Brilliant, yeah, excellent. Yeah, so he was,
because he had such a good reputation.
Beautiful.
Particularly with the example of laying the black stone in its place in the Kaaba, and he basically the other tribes aggressive. They were fighting each other, but they trusted him, and he recommended that they all take the black stone in a cloth,
yes,
and each hold a corner of the cloth. And then he himself was chosen to put the black stone in its correct place.
And that shows that they trusted him.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Any other points on trust? Just shout out, because I can't see anyone's hand.
But his wife as well.
Mm-hmm.
Before his prophethood, his first marriage, his wife saw he was a trustworthy person in business. When
right.
His wife Khadija.
Yes.
And she was so she was so impressed by his character and trustworthiness.
Yes.
Obviously, she saw how he did business, that she chose him as her husband.
Beautiful.
And
excellent. This is definitely corroborating. Anything else? people would leave their stuff with him, for collection. Do you know about this?
Yeah.
So can you elaborate upon it?
I don't know details, but yeah, the people, they would entrust him with their belongings, like when they would go on like trips, and he'd look after them. And this was actually even after he claimed to be a prophet. They continued to trust him with their possessions.
Excellent. There's also a verse in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ لَبِثْتُ فِيكُمْ عُمُرًا مِّن قَبْلِهِ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, and that I had lived before prophethood a whole lifetime before it. Do you not think? Yeah. Now, if you think about what the Quran is going to be a public declaration. So if the Quran is making a public declaration that the Prophet lived a whole life before you, if this statement was going to stir controversy, it would not have been made. If that makes sense. Like, if people are going to say, well, we knew you to be a bad character, and we knew you to be like a dishonest person or something like that. The fact that we don't have any report from any antagonist or any enemy of Islam to indicate that the Prophet was known for lying, even despite the fact that the Quran makes declarations to the fact of his character, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, that you are of impeccable character, is indicative of the fact that this was a given that the Quran was publicly announcing, rather than something of controversial quality. Like when the Quran makes the statements about his impeccable character and his trustworthiness or whatever it may be, it doesn't do so in an argumentative way or persuasive format. It does so in an informative way, which the expression of which is not intended to stir any type of controversy, which we know it didn't. Does that make sense? Or not? Yeah? Alright, so we talked about As-Sadiq al-Amin, the fact that he is the truthful and the trustworthy one. What else can we say in the Meccan period? What else was mentioned? You mentioned some key terms: tribalism, racism. What else kind of thing was mentioned?
I think the Prophet also mentioned the fact that he was unlettered, and the society at the time, they were very involved in like poetry, and they used to compete at elite levels with each other in poetry. So this was something that the Arabs at the time, they took very serious.
Right, but write down also what we just mentioned. So tribalism, racism. Okay, put that in your notes because it's very important. Tribalism, racism. Okay, and infanticide, the idea of killing young girls. I'm not sure if that was mentioned, but these are the kinds of things that were typical in the Meccan environment. Obviously, the Quran and the Hadith come explicitly in opposition to these things. Yeah. What other things in Mecca that could be thought about?
There was, if I remember correctly, there was a lot of lewdness, like lewd behavior. I don't remember a lot of the details, but there was practices. For example, an Arabian woman would have intercourse with several men, and then once she's pregnant, she will simply choose out of the bundle of men who is the father of her offspring. There was a lot of this going around, and he abstained. He was, a virgin until marriage at the age of 25 to Khadija.
Good. So he was chaste. This is a good point. This is a very good point. He was pure. There's actually this very interesting story in the Seerah, in the Meccan period, where the Prophet was going on his way to a gathering, and I'm not sure if you've come across the story, but basically, he fell asleep before he could get there. Have you heard? Yeah, he fell asleep before he could get there, and he recalls it being like Allah has saved him from going to that gathering because there was haram elements there, basically. So even at that time, God was guiding him and stuff. So the chastity element, the purity element, is a big part. And obviously, his heart was being purified as a child. Think about his upbringing. What kind of upbringing did he have? Did he have a nuclear family, or was he something else? What was he? Begin with O.
He was an orphan.
He was an orphan. This is important because it humanizes the character of the Prophet Muhammad. We have to mention this. The Prophet Muhammad was an orphan. Okay, he grew up, with his uncle, and he married a woman that was older than him. Some reports say 5 years older, some say 15 years older. Khadija was much older than him. You know, and if you just look at the very sensitive and innocent way they got married, he was no arrogant man, womanizer like they make out. He was, you know, the way that he approached Khadija was so innocent, like it was through a third party, and he didn't think that she would, you know, she would love him or that she would like him or whatever. And the same thing back with her, and then it was made into a union in a very natural, and he went to the family. You know, this shows like honor. There's this deep level of honor there, don't you feel? Okay. Anything else that was already mentioned by this side before we go to this side? Sorry, because I'm getting involved too much, I think. On what was also mentioned on this side, and in terms of the Meccan, yeah.
Cave Hira, when he used to go to contemplate in the cave.
That hasn't been mentioned yet, so you can put that in your answer. That's fine. Yeah. You can say he had a meditative temperament.
No.
You know, he did have a meditative temperament. He wasn't. Once again, he went in isolation, think about things in the cave. You know.
Still before prophethood. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Meccan period, the whole Meccan period, including prophethood. Yeah.
Anything mentioned about how even during that period they had a lot of rituals and things like that around the Kaaba, a lot of shirk, a lot of polytheism, and he had.
No, but you can mention this. You can mention. This is a new point. But from what the brothers have mentioned already, is there anything we've missed out so far?
Yeah, I'm not sure how far ahead we're going, but we did mention that even after him claiming to be a prophet, they offered him.
Right, this is a very important point. Yeah, so they offered him what? Go ahead.
Yeah, they offered him riches. They offered him women for marriage. They offered him power. They even offered compromising, we will worship your God on one day, and but on the other days, we'll worship our gods. So they made the compromising efforts to to try and persuade him away from his message.
This is very important because a liar, when they're met with this kind of thing, they usually take it like, if you're doing it for materialistic purposes, they said they'll make you the Sayyid, they'll make you the leader of the place, they'll give you women, they want women, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. You know, these negotiations were being had, and if this is what he wanted, he could have gotten it.
Yeah.
This is actually a very important point, because why would someone do this? What is the motivation of doing something like this? You know, if it's for material gain, then he was offered material gain, and he rejected material gain. This is very important. He rejected material gain. And, you mentioned, I think you mentioned, that he lived a life of poverty. In fact, he did. And I think one of the most powerful, and maybe it could be some kind of homework we do for the next session or something, one of the most powerful hadiths, there's 2 or 3 that indicate to this reality. One of them is that when Umar ibn Khattab went into the house and he saw the Prophet, and he's been sleeping on this kind of straw mattress, and the straw lines were on his back, and he said, look at these great kings, they have been given everything, and look at you, basically. He said that they've been given the riches of this dunya, but I'm not opting for that, basically. I can get you the full hadith, exactly what he said. But this kind of thing is really powerful, because his wife Aisha said that we lived on 2 black things, meaning we lived on water and dates. We weren't living on like luxurious foods and middle class lifestyles. It's not what was happening. But this is going more in the Medina period. Let's give the rest of the brothers some time, 3 minutes each, yeah? Go ahead, we'll start with whoever's right most, with the fluorescent jacket. Start with you.
So just mention things that wasn't mentioned. Right?
Yeah, mention as much, whatever you want. And it will be good if you mention things that were not mentioned as well.
So I was going to just mention like some characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ. So like how it was very contemplated a lot, went to Cave Hira. This was also before prophethood. He spent a lot of time there, away from like the noise of the city of Mecca. And this was also like a form of preparation for prophethood. So he was kind of in his nature to be like that. And also a sense of higher sense of shyness as well. He wasn't someone like you mentioned, like a womanizer. Like when he was doing the business for Khadija radhiyallahu anha, he wouldn't even go into the house to ask her for the payment, but he sent his friend through instead, because of his shyness that he had within his character. And that's also also whilst he was being offered these things in Mecca from the Quraysh, like all these riches and women, things of this nature,
he wasn't just living like an easy lifestyle whilst not taking that. He was also just being persecuted as well. So whilst he was praying in front of the Kaaba, the Abu Lahab came and his companion to like throw the intestines of a camel upon him, and even throughout that persecution and stuff like that. At that point, he rejected like the riches. It wasn't just they just left him by himself. He was getting persecuted on top of being offered things of that nature. Also, how he was with his companions. So his companions stayed with him in Mecca. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he came to defend the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And a man of such stature, was the truthful message that he had with him. Like his companions, they went to an extent where it would be like an evidence to prove that what he was saying was true. Because like, how could you go that far for someone that was just in it for the dunya? So yeah, that's kind of like a supporting evidence for his prophethood.
And bring in Medina as well, guys. It's not just Mecca here. Bring in everything, yeah? You got a minute left. If you want to bring anything in, you can.
I think I'll just leave it.
Okay.
Can't think right now. No.
No problem. Next.
So yeah, just to sort of echo everybody in the room, he was an unlettered man who lived in a society where there was a lot of tribalism, racism, infanticide, and lewdness going on, which he abstained from, especially polytheistic and shirky acts, which he also abstained from. He was known for his impeccable character and trustworthiness and truthfulness. He was moving I believe into the Medinian period. He was a military leader, fantastic teacher, husband, family man in general, ruler and companion. And yeah, that's what I have so far. Yeah.
Try and add to it because you've only spoken for 1 minute.
So let me just just to
If you want,
reiterate,
add a few events, add a few things that.
I think one event sort of portrays him in being known as a trustworthy individual. I believe it was on the Mount Safa, the mountain of Safa, where he yelled, Ya Sabaha, which is an Arabic expression, and he goes, if I told you that horsemen were advancing to attack you from the valley on the other side of this mountain, will you believe me? To which they replied, yes, we have always found you truthful. Then the Prophet went on to say, I am a plain warner to you of a coming severe punishment. So that's one example in which he was found to be truthful by people, whether that was his family, friends, critics, or enemies. They all found him to be as such.
It's a really good point. And the fact that's a good evidence of his truthfulness, and the fact that he was seen as truthful because that's how they responded is, we always saw you as truthful. It's very good evidence. The Mount Safa was a very good point. Tariq, do you know?
Yes. Well, the Prophet, he was a very humble man, and as the brothers have already said, that he was he had impeccable manners, and he was known throughout the area as incredibly polite. He'd always greet everybody, strangers or familiar people, with a smile. So he was known for his character like that. And he apart from that, he was also successful militarily, a great general. And one of the nicest stories that I've ever heard is the story of a humble man when he bought the Prophet some grapes, and the Prophet was eating the grapes and he didn't offer to his companions any of them. And when they asked, because it's in our cultures to offer anything you have to other people, when the man went away, he said that because the grapes were sour, I didn't want you for the man to see any expression on your face that may hurt his feelings. So I ate the grapes myself. So that's one of the indications of his character. Also, that throughout his life, he never requested any wealth or any kind of anything that was involved in anything that would be outwardly ostentatious, and he always lived frugally, including when he was at his height of his prophethood. He would live in a house with 3 rooms. So it would be a guest room, his bedroom, and the washroom. So, and this is a man who could have built, a palace of gold for himself, but to the end of his days, he provided an example for all Muslims to live frugally, and that's what we take as an individual who has impeccable manners and who was humble and an example for all of mankind.
Beautiful, fantastic. Well, was very excellent. Just to add to some of this, I think we're getting closer to that model answer that we want. One of the greatest, or for me anyway, one of the most powerful events in, well, 2 or 3 things I want to add actually. Well, first of all, the Prophet, this is a fact, that he buried all of his children except for one. He buried all of his children. It's very easy to come off the tongue, He buried all of his children except for one. He buried his wife, Khadija, and he buried his uncle, but he buried all of his children, all the girls and his sons, etc., except for one. So it's a man he had been an orphan as a child. Just this by itself, like we're talking about a man who had experienced life. Like he had been through grief in life. This is difficult. And I want you to just think about one thing. One of the things that is usually used as an evidence against the Prophet's character is the fact that he engaged in warfare. But the fact that he engaged in warfare once or twice a year, on average, in his Medinan period only, before that he was being persecuted, right? I think that's an evidence for his prophethood, and I'll tell you why. The reason why is because it was risky business claiming to be a prophet. Like, imagine having to put your life on the line once or twice a year. Like, this is not a matter of, okay, you're claiming to be a prophet and now you're living a luxurious lifestyle. You're claiming to be a prophet and this could lead you to be killed. Once or twice a year, people are going to try and take your life. And that happened almost. It came close to that in Uhud, for example, where his tooth was broken and they thought he was dead. And this was a defensive battle, actually, just like most of them were, with the exception of 1 or 2, which you can make an exception. The Romans, you can say, was preemptive, although they killed the emissary first, but we can go into those details later on. That's, I think, an evidence for his prophethood. The fact that he was willing to put himself in these life or death situations. And connected to that is the fact that Allah, in the Quran, He proclaims that He will defend him and He will safeguard him despite all of those attempts on his life. Wallahu ya'asimuka minan nas. Allah, He will protect you against the people. So in other words, there's a godly protection being offered here. And it's a guarantee. It's a godly guarantee. So that's another thing. So just to summarize the points here, he buried all his children except for one. He buried his wife. He went through intense grief in his life, persecution in his life. And in the time when he was the leader of a country, his life was being challenged once or twice a year. And when he was living in that state, he was living in poverty. This was a leader who had been living in poverty. Now they say 9 wives. 9 wives at one time is no joke. In fact, this is exactly what a womanizer doesn't do. Sorry to say. When they say, he had 9 wives at one time. Yeah, he did have 9 wives at one time. All of them were divorcees and widows, except for one, which is Aisha. Yeah? He had 9 wives at one time. All of them were with him until he died. So he maintained 9 women at one time. And the reasons, obviously, we know, tribal, to get the tribes together and to, all that things. But let's just focus on the fact that he had 9 women at one time. A womanizer doesn't commit to relationships. That is a rule. A womanizer, he goes from one woman to the next. He uses the woman and he goes to the next. He doesn't want to contribute to her life. He doesn't want to take care of her. That's not what a womanizer does. Womanizers are the most afraid of commitment. But having 9 women at one time means he's committed to 9 women's health, safety, protection, physical, psychological, and so on. Their learning at one time. He is elevating their status in society in a way that nothing else could have. So these arguments that you always find that the arguments that are used against the Prophet are the best arguments for his prophethood. Or he was a warlord, or he was whatever, or a womanizer. But when you really think about it, you realize that actually, it's not the case. And just on the point of warlord, since this video probably will go out after I've spoken to Peterson, who had made that comment. I mean, the problem is with this comment is that warlord indicates, the term warlord indicates that the Prophet, he got power through aggressive and violent means. That's how dictionaries define it. But the Prophet did not gain power through violent and aggressive means. The Prophet Muhammad, he went to Ta'if, as you guys know, and this is a very important event. He went to Ta'if by himself. Okay, he didn't go with an army. And when he went to Ta'if, he was pelted and violently rejected by his people. Ta'if happened before the migration to Medina. And he was rejected violently, almost killed, actually. And then he went to Al-Aws wal-Khazraj, 2 groups of people who embraced Islam through a religious incentive and made him into a political leader. Through popular support, he gained leadership. He didn't gain leadership there was no war of Medina that established him as the leader of Medina. It was through popular support that he became the leader of Medina. The Aws wal-Khazraj gave bay'ah to him, pledge of allegiance to him, and as a result they put him in that position. And he, as soon as he got leadership, he made constitutions between him and the minority groups, namely Jewish people and polytheists. And we have those documents to hand. It's not like these things are extant, not extant. They are historically extant. They are catalogued. We have them all the way back to Al-Zuhri, his Kitab al-Ghazawat. All of these things with a chain of narration, which is good, which talks about the minority rights that were granted to Jewish people. The minority is very important. We must, and put this in the notes as well, we must talk about the fact that the Prophet, and this is another charge, he's an anti-Semitic person, he killed this person. Why would he, if that was the case, why would he make a constitutional agreement with the Jewish people when he went to Medina? And that constitution we have with us. In fact, you can make an argument that the pluralism that existed in the Islamic state was more robust than the pluralism that exists in liberal states, especially considering the fact that they were given their own courts of law that would have efficacious rule. Such a thing doesn't exist in Britain for Muslims. Like, for example, you have a Sharia council, it's not going to have efficacious law. The police are not going to come and knock on your door if the fatwa that the sheikh gives is not going to be implemented. But that would have been the case for Jewish courts in Muslim countries. And this is the case. So there was a strong element of pluralism that existed. And there was a strong element of national identity based on religion, of not compulsion of religion, all these things. And protection, explicit, express protection that was given. So I think these points are very important. Because one of the things I heard, he's anti-Semite. But when the Quran talks about itself, the Quran talks about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his interaction with, for example, Banu Nadir and Banu Qurayza. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ شَاقُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. That is because when he mentions in the first couple of verses, the excesses, يُخْرِبُونَ بِيُوتَهُمْ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ وَأَيْدِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فَاعْتَبِرُوا يَا أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ, and so on. They destroyed their own houses and so on, all these kinds of events that took place. And then he says that is because they went against, they challenged Allah and His Messenger. It doesn't say ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ يَهُودٌ. It's because they were Jewish. Why is it always the case when Allah, He speaks about fighting groups of people who are not Muslim, it's couched in language of justification and it's to do with their actions. If it doesn't say they were because they were Jewish, they were ethnically Jewish or whatever. It doesn't say anything like this. So the charge of anti-Semitism is a flatly false one, especially considering, and this is one of the most important things you can, because this discussion of anti-Semitism will keep coming up. But this is the nail. We talked about one thing. This will be the nail in the coffin now, especially considering the Prophet married a Jew. That's it. Safiya bint Huyay was a Jewish woman. She came from Huyay bin Akhtab, who was a Jewish man. She was ethnically Jewish, and she was one of those people who the Prophet married. And not only that, when she was being harassed for her Jewishness, the Prophet gave her words to say which exalted her honor, namely that I come from the lineage of Harun, Harun. So if it was a matter of anti-Semitism, when she came to complain to the Prophet, right, that, oh, you know, these women are telling me about I'm a Jew and so on, he would have said to them, oh yeah, they're right about that. You know, it's true, you are Jewish, you know. And it made some maybe agreed with it. But why did he give her words to defend herself, which would exalt her ethnic status if he was such an anti-Semite? These are important things. And the point that you made about racism or anti-racism is an extremely important point. Because there is, I'll tell you this explicitly, and I've challenged people with this. There is no equivalent of la fadla hadith, which is there's no virtue of a black man over a white man, or a white man over a black man, or an Arab over a non-Arab, or non-Arab over an Arab, in any world religion. In any ancient world religion. Obviously, you can, when I say ancient here, we have to, obviously you can say this feminism, whatever religion, or you know, or Scientology. We're talking about ancient world religions, yeah? There is no equivalent. There's not one verse in the Bible, the Old Testament, that explicitly condemns racism. You'll never find, in fact, the New Testament in itself could be said to have things inside of it which indicate racism itself. Jesus saying to the Gentile woman who came, that I don't, you know, it's not for the dogs to come and, you know, he referred to her as a dog. Because she was a Gentile, she was a non-Jew. Now this in modern parlance would be seen as racist, discriminatory. But you don't find anything equivalent. Imagine this was in the Quran. Imagine this was in the Hadith. Imagine for a second that you had the equivalent of a non-Arab man coming to the Prophet and the Prophet referring to them as a dog. Please imagine. Please imagine what they would do with that. So Islam is clearly the most anti-racist religion in the face of the earth. Clearly. And for that reason, it's the most multicultural religion in the face of the earth. And it's the only religion which takes a stance the way it does on these issues. So much so that we talk about Bilal, the black man, who married Hala bint Auf, by the way, who's an Arab. But there's more than that, like Osama bin Zayd. He was black as well. He had black skin, literally had black skin. And the Prophet made him a leader of armies. He loved him, actually, because his father was Zayd ibn Haritha, who was, as you know, right? So the idea of race is a very important one. Tribe is a very important one. Because the Prophet Muhammad was able to unify the tribes. No one else before him could do that. The Quran says that itself. You know, that you alafta bayna qulubihim. That you had, that Allah had wa'allafa bayna qulubihim. That he made their hearts united. وَلَوْ أَنفَقَتَ مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ مَا أَلَّفْتَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِهِمْ. And if you had put all your money into this project, you would not have been able to, from the whole world, make them united. It was only a spiritual and religious incentive that made them united. And then you have the charge once again of the Prophet being war hungry and power hungry. Because they say, fine, maybe he was not money hungry. Maybe it wasn't a woman thing, but maybe it was about power hungry. So why is it then, when he in Hudaybiyah, when he was trying to go into to do Umrah with the Sahaba, with the companions, he criticized, this is very interesting, he criticized them for being war hungry. He says, وَيْحَكَ قُرَيْشٍ, he says, woe to you Quraysh, لَقَدْ أَكَلَتْكُمُ الْحَرْبُ, that war has devoured you. He said, war has devoured you. So if he was the one who wanted war all the time, then why is he criticizing the opposition for wanting war? In fact, he went there to do a peace treaty, and this shows you the pragmatism that you're talking about. Hudaybiyah is the best bedrock example in the seerah for compromise with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, and this, they use Hudaybiyah, fuqaha, the jurisprudence, the jurists, they use it to show that you can have peace treaties with any nation you want. Islam is not a religion that doesn't want peace. That's false. If it was a religion that couldn't handle peace, had no propensity for peace, or couldn't deal with peace, then Hudaybiyah would have been out of the question. And Hudaybiyah is one of the most bedrock examples of where Islam is not only capable of peace, but is calling for it on a military and geopolitical level. And who broke Hudaybiyah's agreement? It was them. It was the enemy tribes who broke Hudaybiyah. And when it broke, and Fath Mecca took place, when the Prophet could have gone in and slaughtered everybody, those people who had been torturing and persecuting, and he could have done all of that. But when he went into Mecca, he went in, and the narrations say that his head was on parallel with the horse's head, meaning he was arched over in humility. He wasn't pomp like maybe I would be, going in like some kind of professional wrestler. There was no, it's human nature. When you beat someone, you see it in the MMA, you see it in this and that. You raise your arms and you do this. It's a human impulse. You're so excited. It's a psychological reaction. The Prophet was not into this dunya stuff. He was not into this worldly stuff. Can you imagine such a victory, bro? Such a victory that for years and years, 10 plus 13, we're talking like 20 plus years, that he's fighting against these people, war after war. Ibn al-Qayyim says 19 wars, 19 times you could have been killed. 19 times you were maimed or hurt or injured. Your brethren were killed, and your family members were killed. So many people died. And you finally get to that stage where you conquer this city, not through fighting, but through just walking in, because they know that they're the dominant force. They didn't fight. And you do so in such a humble way. That, wallahi, that in and of itself is this is not just us, it's not lip service when we say that he has impeccable character. This is the reality, because we can see it through his actions. And it was those actions, you talk about Salah ad-Din, that exactly stopped Salah ad-Din from going in and doing the same thing. He thought about that. Because if you look at the Crusades history, the Crusades, when they came in, they destroyed everybody. Look at the reports. It's not even reports from Muslims. They came in and they slaughtered men, women and children, as the Bible talks about in the Old Testament. They slaughtered them, destroyed them. That kind of stuff you see in the Old Testament, you'll never find in the Quran. Go in and kill the women, the children, the ox and the sheep. Kill everything that breathes. Literally, this is a verse in the Bible.
The blood was ankle deep.
The blood was ankle deep. That's what they say. This is what historians say. The blood was ankle. Can you imagine that? Like children were decimated. Now it was Salah ad-Din's turn. And he said the same thing that the Prophet said, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم, which is that there's no blame on you today. You're forgiven, basically. Where did Salah ad-Din get this impeccable character? And this, he got it from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The same thing with Umar ibn Khattab. He could have gone to Jerusalem and fought and killed everybody. The Prophet predicted that Jerusalem would be overtaken, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about prophecies, yeah? But when Umar ibn Khattab went in, what did he do? Did he kill the people? He told, as soon as he went in, he told, and this is mentioned, by the way, by Thomas Walker Arnold in The Preaching of Islam. It's an Orientalist book. I mean, Orientalists even admit this. Orientalists admit this. That when Umar ibn Khattab went into Jerusalem, he went in and he was eager. I'm paraphrasing obviously, but he was eager to give Jews and Christians their rights, to protect them, to not destroy any place of worship. This is extremely important stuff. Because the accusations that are held against Muslims are not just unjust. They are inaccurate and ahistorical. This is the reality, honestly. We need to be able to, because these are misconceptions now. These have become fabrications. Your Prophet did this and he did that and he killed these people. Yes, there were some people that were, but the Prophet himself killed only one person in his life, by the way. In war, was only one person. But there were wars. But they were not like the wars of, the 20th century. Like, what on earth are we comparing it to? We're talking about hundreds of people that died, maybe in all the wars. Hundreds of people that died. Hundreds, not even 1,000. And if we want to go liberal, then maybe 1,000 to 2,000. But liberal estimate. How are you going to compare that to the bloody excesses of the 20th century? 30 million, 40 million. Like, let's make a comparison. A few people, 100 people died in tribes, in skirmishes and fights and so on. In mostly, and I say this, mostly defensive wars versus 30 million that died. Oh, your religion causes this and causes that. Which causes what, really? Nationalism caused 30 million death. It was national imperialism, your version of nationalism. Power hungry. This is not the same thing. Where the Prophet ﷺ very explicitly said, ماذا لو خلوا بيني وبين سائر الناس. Like, this is in the same hadith when he said, ويحك قريش لقد أكلتهم الحرب. That woe to Quraysh, that the war has overtaken them. He says, what would it have disadvantaged them if they just let me go to the people and speak to them, basically give da'wah to them, basically proselytize them, basically bring them to the religion of Islam. Meaning that the only reason for this in the first place was to have access to people so you could tell them about Tawheed, told them about the religion of Islam and Abraham, Moses and Jesus. It wasn't to acquire wealth and to acquire treasures and so on. And he wasn't a beneficiary to any of that. He lived a life of poverty. And you know, one other thing I want to add. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we said he had 19 wars, but that's Ghazawat, not Saraya, by the way, not the small skirmishes. He lived in this poverty, 9 wives, all of these things, difficulties, yeah? Religious rulings in the morning. He had as an obligation that he were to pray the whole night, 2/3 of the night or half a night, or a third of the night. Can you imagine, like we pray 5 times a day? Imagine spending, let's count it, let's say 3 hours a day, just standing up and praying. I can't handle that, sorry to say. Can't handle that even in Ramadan. 3 hours is a long time. We do Taraweeh 1 hour. Imagine times that by 3 and make it 365 days a week. Plus fasting, plus wives, and plus fighting. Sorry, man. This is too much. No, what imposter can keep that up? Now, I want you to think about that. What imposter can keep up the fact that they have to pray 2/3 of the night, or a third of the night, or half of the night, as the Quran states, yeah? نصفه أو انقص منه قليلا أو زد عليه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا. Yeah, half of it, or a third of the night, or 2/3 of the night, like that range. You're praying, you're standing up. Your legs are cracking from the pain and so on. And you're still in prayer for that long. And it's obligatory upon you. Because the Quran says, نافلة لك. It's for nafila means it's here for him is obligatory. So he had to pray that much. And someone say, well, how do we know he did that? Every single one of his wives were witness to that. Yani it couldn't be that all 9 of his wives, and this is one of the wisdoms of having 9 wives, came together and colluded that, yeah, we're going to have to uphold this lie that he prayed 1/3 of the night, or, and or the community members that saw him pray, other community members saw that, yani, let's uphold this lie in this tacit collusion that we all have together and we all uphold this lie. No, he prayed this long. People saw it, even his wives, people that he was traveling with, he was with, they saw that stuff. So what kind of imposter would that have to be? It would be a level of motivation that is not explicable through human means. You're praying 2/3 of the night, you're putting your life on the line, you're living on dates and water, you're sleeping on straws, you're eating scraps, and somehow this is all a lie. Somehow you made it all up. Like, it doesn't seem right. Just by looking, and this is why the Prophet ﷺ himself is a bayinah. Himself, that's his life is an evidence. Why do you think the people that were with him and believed in him, why do you think they were so certain, like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, that he was on the haqq? Because they knew about him, they knew about his life. There's no chance that this guy is, this man here, there's no chance that he's making this up. There's no chance that he's an imposter. There's no chance. Just based on his character alone. Now, with the person next to you, actually, with that we conclude. Yes, we will do more interactive stuff, but what we're going to do, inshallah, for Monday's lesson, I want you to produce, and I know that some of you have already written something for the previous thing that I set. I will be looking at that as well, inshallah. So whoever's finished that, please give it to me. It's optional, you don't have to give it, but this one I do want everyone to do. Even if it'll take 5 minutes of your time. Based on everything that everyone has said today in this brainstorm, and what I said as well, we need to redo the 3 minutes. Yeah? Everyone's going to redo the 3 minutes, because we want to make it as gold standard as possible, akhi. If someone asks you this question, it's one of the most important questions you can ever be asked about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We follow him. We follow him. He's the final prophet. So for us, we need to be able to be on point and give the answers that will basically be the most pertinent, salient points about his life, which indicate his genuinity. Yeah? Which indicate his legitimacy, as you mentioned. It's a good word they used, Mu'adh. So let's think together, and we'll put these points, inshallah, and on Monday we'll go further. And also read the K by H thing on my website, the 10 points, okay? Because we're going to be talking about evidences now, because we haven't even gotten into evidences. We haven't got into prophecies or history or linguistic or structural. We haven't even started that yet. And look already how convincing it is. Like, we haven't even started the evidences, and look how convincing this thing is, just by the Prophet ﷺ's character itself, which we have underexplored. Let's be honest about it in the dawah. We're given it as haqq. So, any questions on that? All right. With that, we conclude, inshallah ta'ala, and we'll see you in the next session. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.